Reading from Genesis chapter 50, verses 15 through 21. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph should bear a grudge against us and pay us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him?" So they sent a message to Joseph, saying, "Your father charged before he died, saying, 'Thus you shall say to Joseph, please forgive, I beg you, the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' But Joseph said to them, 'Do not be afraid, for I am in God's place. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones.' So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them."
You know, there are some who say it's sinful to have a fellowship room built onto your church building. And as I smell right now, I think they're right. That smells really good. And I think that's going to be dangerous for y'all. But I promise to keep this a little bit shorter than normal because I know it smells really good. But the only thing harder than this is the lesson after this, 1 o'clock. That's really tough. I'm going to lose all of you. I can just tell already. I appreciate you being here. Join me at Genesis 50, where that great reading he just gave a moment ago takes place. And you know what the story is. Joseph's story has been just so compelling. Many people do VBS on this. Many VeggieTales stories about Joseph and the way his life works out. And that great conclusion that he says to his brothers, "You meant this for evil. God meant it for good." What an amazing statement. And I just wonder if we can claim that for ourselves. I wonder if we can believe this is true of our lives as well. There are those movies you go to and you see with your wife, if you still take her to movies. You take her to a movie and it's one of those, oh, that just feels good. And you throw away your popcorn, your soda, and you go home and you mow the yard before you eat because you went to the movie early. Or there's those kinds that you go and watch and they're so compelling and they're so gripping for what they mean to life and the way they present a truth or a thought that you never thought of before. And you say to your wife, "We got to go get some dessert somewhere and let's talk about this movie for a while because there's something so compelling about it." I wonder if this passage is supposed to be like a kid's fairy tale where you read it before you go to bed and you say, "Oh, how sweet." And you kind of go on with life as usual. Or if you're supposed to read the story and you go, "You know what? If this is really true, if this is really a principle that we are supposed to apply to our own lives, it changes everything about my life." Which is it? I would almost think it's like a fairy tale ending, except for one thing. It's recorded in a book that is our source of authority. It is in Scripture. It is our book. It's where we go to find our understanding about what life is supposed to be, regardless of what it looks like out here in the 5 o'clock news and in the world we look around us. This is the truth. So if this is the truth, how can I take this passage? People meant this for evil. Someone meant this for evil. But God meant it for good. And we immediately wonder, do those words really apply to us, right? This is how God used to work, right? This is how God used to do it for those select few back there in the Old Testament. But now it sounds too good to be true. And we compare it to kind of like promises that expire real quickly. That commercial, you can you can eat whatever you want to and take this pill and you'll still lose weight. Or you get that email. I still got one about 2 weeks ago. A Nigerian sends me $500 to put in my bank account. And if I'll send him 1,000, he'll send me 2,000 more. There are people who fall for that stupid stuff. And then there's that one, you can keep your insurance if you want to. You have you heard that promise? You heard that one? So is it too good to be true? Is this how God used to work? You know, there are some people that were blessed this way. It's just if you're really good or you're really sweet or you're just in the right spot. Maybe it's for a select few. There are people whose lives really do seem to work almost in this fairy tale way. You see on the news, somebody did go into that gas station, did buy that lottery ticket, and won $212 million. Somebody that works for, just not for me. So maybe this is just a promise that just there for Genesis, it just applies to Joseph, and then you go on from there, and it's Exodus, and we just forget about it. It's back there. I'd almost agree with that, except for the fact that in the New Testament, this principle is cropped back up again, only not in a narrative. This time it's put in a proposition. Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those who love God, who are called according to His purpose. Is this true? Is it really? All things? Come on. All things work together for good to those who love God? You really think that's true? Paul says it as a statement. He says it as a guarantee every believer receives. All things, good, bad, ugly, confusing, distorted, all things work together. God puts them with other things. God mixes them with other things, and it produces good for the one who loves God. And that good is defined later on in this passage as making you more like Jesus, His Son. Because you signed on for this. You signed on for this since Jesus died for you, you take on His form and His image, and He makes you in the image of His Son, and everything that works toward that is good. That's what Paul says. This story in Genesis is an example, one instance of a universal principle, all things work together for good. I just wonder, here's Joseph at the end of the story, not his life, but he's at the end of his story, and he says, you know what I've learned? I've learned that everything works out for good, that God, what people mean for evil, God can superintend for good. That's what I've learned after looking at all the evidence. And what we as believers are supposed to do is to be able to view life this way as it happens, not after it's over. We should approach life as if all the bad that happens to us and all the evil that's done to us, we got to look at it and we got to say, you know what? I know what this was intended for, but we believe that God uses it for good. I should be able to do that as life is lived, not after it's over with hindsight. That's what we're being taught. What would happen if we actually believe this? We really believe this promise. What would it do to our lives? And I just want to make you just look at this passage a couple times. If you believe this promise is for us, it makes it easier for Christians to forgive. I want you to look in this passage as the original intent. I want you to see that we're going to read this passage 2 or 3 times. So when Joseph's brothers saw that the father was dead, Jacob's now died, and they said, man, we gotta, now Joseph's going to pull out all the stops and he's going to get us back. And they make up a lie. The father never said this. The father never said this. But the sons make it up. Sounds like a good one. Sounds like families after the loved one dies and the will's broken open. Have you ever been to one of those cases? This is what families do. Listen what they say. It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. He didn't, but they're going to say he did. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin. They did evil to you. Now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. He'd already decided to do this long ago. And his brothers came, fell down before him. Behold, we're your servants. Do with us as you want. Joseph said, don't fear. Am I in the place of God? I've already forgiven you. You know what? If you really believe that all things work together for good to those who love God, it will make it easier for you to forgive. It does not let people off the hook, and it does not mean that what they did was no big deal. That's not true. But if you know that even when someone else does something to you that is wrong and scornful and awful, you believe God's big enough to take care of that and work it for your good, no matter what their intentions were. And that makes it easier to forgive them of their sin. What do you know about Joseph? There was a day he was bringing some stuff to his brothers, right? Just kind of checking on his brothers, really. And the brothers see him coming. They know he's the favorite little son. And so they're going to take care of him. And so one of them says, let's kill him. No, let's not kill him, Judah says. We can't do that. They throw him in the bottom of a pit, and they hear him crying for his life. What are you guys doing? Don't do this to me. And they kind of take this conference. What are we going to do? And just at that time, some Ishmaelites. There's not much worse than being sold to a bunch of cousins you don't like. Anybody have family reunions with cousins you don't like? Of course you do. That's why you don't go except every other time. You have these cousins you don't like, and they're going by on their way to Egypt. They said, let's sell them to some cousins. Man, you know what? I had a brother, and I didn't like him, and I never sold him to some cousins I don't like. That's terrible, and that's awful. And they sell him to some cousins he doesn't like. And they go on down to Egypt. And then he's sold to Potiphar. And there's Potiphar's wife who's making up some lies about him. And there's another time people making up this stuff and doing things that are unfair and evil to him. And he's put in prison. And he helps these people who get out of prison. He says, remember me, and they don't. And they leave him there to languish too. There's a bunch of people on his list that could easily be on a vengeance list for him. Over and over and over again, people do things to him and dump on him and make a mess of his life. And yet, God mixes that all together and makes something amazing out of it. And as he adopts this perspective, it makes it easier when the time comes to be able to let them off the hook and not take vengeance. I can forgive you because I know God had something bigger in mind. Again, it doesn't make it no big deal. And I'm saying to you, this is tough to do, but when you have this perspective, you can do it. My parents divorced when I was 1 year old. My mom and stepdad married when I was 5. And I always wondered what that got. Somebody was asking me last night, are you related to any Furbys around? I've never met another Furby. Never met another. I have no idea where they all live up north in Michigan, and I don't like Yankees, so I don't know where they are. I've been up there a time or two to meet some of them, right? And I've met one or two, but I don't know where the Furbies are. They're a weird lot, right? So one day I decided to go up there. This was back, I was in Kent at the time, so back in 1998 or 6, something like that. Somewhere in the late 90s, I go up there to meet these people. And a friend goes with me from Zenith. We're up there, and we meet a half-sister, and I meet a half-brother, and they've got all sorts of, they live an awful life. Describing these details, I could give them to you, but it would bore you to death, and but I'll say this one thing. I had a half-brother who had 3 kids that month, turning 2. None of them were married. None of them were related to each other. So he had 3 2-year-old kids by 3 different women, none of them his wife, and he thought that was the neatest thing to brag about. And that's their life, and they have no idea where the mothers are. They have no idea where those kids are. He just fathered them and just let them out. And so there they are, and they're roaming around here, and I'm looking at this, and I'm going, man, would I have been like this if I'd stayed in this mess? And then the woman that my dad cheated on my mom with comes in, and I had no idea what to say to her, right? I leave all that stuff behind, and I come back and I reflect on this a while. Later on, going back in time when I was 5, my mom met this guy. He was a great guy. He wasn't a believer at the time, but his mother was. She was a charter member of the Lamont Church of Christ and Fredericktown Church of Christ, one of the most godly women I ever met in my life. She died a few years ago, but I love her, love her, love her, and she, through her influence, converted all of us. And we grew up in this church of about 40 people in Fredericktown, Missouri. We were called mutual edification. You don't hire a preacher, your own people do it. We had no people to do it, so we put teenagers up there and preteens, like 8-year-olds, put them up on a little shelf right here. Literally, they built a shelf so I could step up and you could see me. And that's where I learned to love to preach, and that's what I knew. I knew from the age of 8 what I wanted to do. I look back at this and I go, for years I harbored anger at this guy for what he'd done, but I'm looking back at that and I'm going, you know what? What an amazing story it was produced. All things work for good. Now, here's the thing. I can look back and say that. But can I have the faith that can, at actual time, as things are happening, be able to look at things done to me that are unfair and say, you know what, God's going to work this out. I don't know how, I don't see it yet, but I trust that it's going to happen. Can you do that? If you believe this promise and you live for it, it makes it easier to forgive people. I want you to look at verses 19 and verse 21. Makes it easier not to be afraid. Look at verse 19. This is after they made up this statement of what their father said. And here's what Joseph says. Do not fear. Then verse 21. Do not fear. The most common command of Scripture is do not fear. And I've been told that it appears 365 times in Scripture. One for every day of life. Don't be afraid. Here's what Joseph is saying. If you believe all things work together for the good of those who love God, you don't have to be afraid in real time. He says to the brothers, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I believe this principle, and because I believe this principle, you don't need to be afraid at all. Even when you make the mistake and you are the offender, God still works despite your action to produce good things. Do not be afraid. You can live this life without the fear that everybody else has of you, that the bad things done to you will destroy you or mess you up. James goes so far as to say this, count it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds. When people do things to you, when people say things about you that are hurtful, and that are evil toward you, I want you to count it pure joy because you know God's going to do something in you through this that's going to make you better. Oh, that sounds sadistic, doesn't it? Count it pure joy when trials come. Yee-haw! The doctor's analysis comes back and I've got this disease. I'm going to see what God can do. And that sounds weird to me, but that's what James says. I think what this means is God's got this plan for you to make you like His Son. And He's got, have you ever put together a puzzle? You got this puzzle, you're going to put together a 2,000-piece puzzle. And of course you put the edges together first because they're the easiest ones to put together. But the thing that helps you the most is you've got a picture on the front of that box that tells you what this is going to look like when you're done. Can you imagine trying to put one together if you didn't? Would you be able to do it at all? You've got this puzzle and you got this purple piece. This is your life. This puzzle picture, this is your life. This is what God has in mind for you, to make you like His Son. And into your life comes a puzzle piece that's purple. And you hate purple. You never think there's anything that purple fits in your life. And you're like, this doesn't fit. God, this is random. This is just so totally chaotic. There's no way this fits in my life. And God says, just be calm. Just be calm. I've got a puzzle picture. And if you look at that lower right-hand corner, there's just a little splash of purple. That's where it fits. And I'm going to make it make sense when you can see the whole thing. And I want you to trust me until you do. Relax. Don't be full of fear. So you let your grandkids come to your house and they bring all 3 Iron Man movies to your house. Iron Man 1, 2, and 3, and then he appears on all those other weird movies, right? So he makes appearances everywhere. And you're in the middle of Iron Man 2, and it just looks like he's going to be destroyed, and the whole franchise is messed up. Listen, you don't get all that uptight. Why? Because Iron Man 3 is over there on the shelf. If he dies here, there can't be a number 3, and I already know there's a number 3. The only thing about the tension, it still makes the movie worthwhile, is you're wondering, how does he get out of this mess? How does this end up so good so that there's a part 3? That's what you do with your life. Things come in that are unfair, uninvited. You don't want them. You didn't ask for them. Other people threw them at you, or whatever comes up, and you say, I didn't ask for this. How's this going to end? You have a little tension, but it's not an ultimate tension. You don't fear because you believe the promise is for you, that all things work together for good. And what others intend for evil, God intends for good. You really believe that, and you put that in your heart, you say, I know this is true, I can take that to the bank. Then you will not fear with that ultimate kind of fear that shakes people's lives to the core. Third thing you'll know. provides incredible comfort and hope. If you look at verse 21 at the end, after it says, "As for you, you meant evil against me," verse 20, God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. "Do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." And He comforted them. This truth comforts people. There's great assurance in this. I believe this is true, but I don't always say it aloud. Romans 8:28 is great to quote or put on when you sign something. But sometimes you don't say it. That 18-year-old who just been raped, I believe this truth applies to her. But I don't think you say it out loud. You want to give full credence to what she's experiencing, and you do not want to be flippant with it at all. And so you don't say it out loud. Or to that couple who's standing on the graveside as they're lowering their only son into the ground, don't say it then. This promise sounds it is amazing, but it's too strong for that moment. Be present and communicate it with your presence, but don't say it out loud. It's just not something they need to hear, as wonderful as it is. But there will be a day in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks when you go and you share with them this truth and you remind them what they already know. The Romans 8:28 is true. You don't know when it will be seen. You don't know when you'll realize it, or will you ever know it, because God doesn't have a deadline to make it happen, and He's not going to necessarily reveal it to you at a time when you demand it. But you'll honor it. Sometime in the not too distant future, they'll acknowledge that promise is true and they believe it. I do not believe that in the bottom of that pit, Joseph was singing Kumbaya. I also don't believe that when he's on this caravan about to be sold down to Egypt, he's going, "God is so good." He's not able to do that at the time. But I do think something is going through his mind. Do you remember a vision God gives him that things are going to work out okay? Do you remember a vision Joseph got? It's called a dream. And it gets a little hazy sometimes, and the snow breaks in, and there's some public service announcements that disrupt it. But all the while, that dream is there, and Joseph's going, God's got something in mind for this is going to work out. I know the dream He gave me, and I know it, and I'm going to hang in here. And after a year more of being in the jail, I'm sitting here, he's probably sitting there going, I'm tired of all this, but something drives him to hang in there. And if he had given up that dream halfway through that time and just chunked it, we wouldn't have the rest of the story. He held on, and he held on, and he was made second in command of the entire nation. I mean, this thing drove him. Provided him hope when everything seemed hopeless. I don't know if you men have this problem. I bet you do. Happens in my house once in a while. I'll be talking to Melissa, and we'll be talking about something, and in my brilliance, I already know what she's going to say. And so I don't really listen to what she's saying because I already know what she's going to say. And while she's saying what she's going to say, that I already know what it is, I'm already formulating a brilliant response to what I know she's about to say. Because I already know what she's going to say. And she's saying it right now, but I'm already formulating in my mind what I'm going to say. And so after she says what she says, I let out my brilliant statement. And she looks at me and says, well, it's obvious you didn't hear what I said at all. So let me try this again. And this time I want you to listen to me. And she said nothing like what I expected her to say. And it changed everything. My response was stupid. As brilliant as I thought it was stupid because it didn't match what she said. And she'll say, now this time, I'm going to say this. You don't think this happens. This happens. And she says to me, this time let me finish and listen. And I really believe what God wants to say to us when we get in turmoil and we get so fidgety and frustrated. We want to know the end of the story. We want to know what God's going to do this and how this is going to work out for good. And I don't see how it's going to. And God's going to have to explain this to me. He says, let me finish. Let me finish. I'm not done with the story yet. And I'm not going to tell you till I'm ready to finish it. I believe that promise is true. It'll make it easier to forgive. It'll make it easier to live without the fear that other people have to live with. It makes you live with great comfort and hope, even in the midst of trial. But there's one other thing, and I want you to hear this one statement of what Joseph says. Am I in the place of God? You get that in verse 19? Don't fear. Am I in the place of God? Did I do all this? Am I responsible for how this worked out? No. I can't possibly have written this story. I can't possibly have made all this work out, and you guys don't need to be uptight either, because none of us could. We're all finite creatures, and God's an infinite being who's making this all. Are we like God? God is amazing. I think believing this promise makes us marvel at a God who can pull this off. How can God do all that? How can God possibly say to us, everything that happens to you, no matter what it is, I will make it work for good? How can God say that? Only because He's so sovereign, He controls all the variables. He can make sure there's nothing outside the realm of His control. Now I'm going to say this, and you're going to disagree, but I'm right. God is not in control of this world, but He's in charge of it. And because He's in charge of it, whatever we do by our free will, He can plug it right back into what He wants to do and get His will done. He's not in control of you. Any teacher that says, I'm in control of my classroom, I'm going to laugh at your face. You're not in control of those kids, but you're in charge of them. And when they do something outlandish, and they will, don't tell me they won't, when they will, you are in charge to take care of that, right? That's what it means to be sovereign. God's in charge. And He says to us, I'll take care of this thing. I promise you, I guarantee you, because I can, I will make all things work together for good. There is only one way I can explain how this works. You ever make chocolate chip cookies? My favorite dessert of all time. Surely there'll be some back there. If not, you're not a true Church of Christ or something. I remember making some in the kitchen with my mom years ago, back before we slab it and throw it on there and put it, you got the tubes now. Crank out the chocolate chips. You had to mix stuff. My favorite flavor of all for ice cream and stuff is vanilla. And she took out this little vanilla extract bottle and she put a little bitty bit of it, and I thought, that's not enough to do anything. That doesn't seem like, well, she says it's amazing. It's like magic. I said, okay. I smelled it. It smells so good. I took that bottle and you ever seen the bitter beer commercial where the guy goes, yeah, that stuff makes everything become something wrong. It is nasty. It is awful. And she just laughed over there in the corner, and I'm sitting there going, how can something like that go into this mix, be mixed together, and produce something like that? Looking at a chocolate chip cookie. That's a really good question. Now, there's going to be somebody in here and come up here and try to explain to me how vanilla extract works. Please don't. I love the mystery. Somebody comes up to me one time when I had, because I've asked this of people who cook, and they said, well, it's mostly this weird sort of alcohol that burns away, and then the good flavor stays. And I just looked at them and I said, leave me alone. I don't want to know. That's kind of a weird mystery. But that's how I explain this. This is what I think makes God so amazing. And this is why I put this sermon where it is. All weekend we were talking about reasons why you should respond. And Friday night, the reason why you should be a Christian and you respond, because there's a judgment coming where you will have to answer to the standard that God has revealed to us. And you will have to answer, and there will be judgment in heaven and hell. And last night we talked about this too. Last night it was more like, you're going to experience frustration, and the faith that God gives you sustains you in this life through all the frustrations you have. And this morning we talked about the cost you're going to have to pay, but it's worth it. We talked about all that, but when it comes down to it, this is my favorite. You're issued a promise when you become a believer. You become God's child. You become His favored one. He puts His Holy Spirit within you and makes you promises. Yes, you have costs. We've talked about that. It's going to rearrange your life. But the promise is amazing. And He looks at us and says, I'm sovereign, and I will be yours. I will be your God. You will be my people. And I will make this promise. There's nothing going to happen to you that I can't make it work out for good. And that does not apply to unbelievers. This is not a general humanitarian grace of God. This is not. This is for those who love God and have been called according to His purpose. And we have this promise. And we should be people who can forgive. We should be people who aren't living in fear when everybody's watching Fox News and going nuts. We should not be the people who are going around with hopelessness and a sense of not direction. We have comfort, and we have an awesome God who is our Father, and we are His children. I can't think of a better reason at all. come to the end of this. The promise is amazing, and it's almost too good to be true, except that it isn't. And it's bumper to bumper. It's all your life. I would liken this to the game of spades. I don't know if you ever played spades before. Everybody in a dorm has to know how to play spades, right? Spades is the trump. It's higher than anything else. And you'll get a hand and you'll have a ace, king, queen of hearts, and ace, king, queen of diamonds. You think, I'm going to take a bunch of these? And you lay down that ace, and there's somebody who doesn't have any at all, but all they have is spades, and a little bitty two of spades wipes out that ace. And you're just like, oh, this is the second coming, right? Because this is not fair. This is not right. Here's the thing that you're going to do. Whatever hand you've been dealt, or whatever hand has been dealt to you, your partner is God, and He's all spades. And He trumps everything. When bad things happen, you can't quite figure it out. He takes His time to play His card, so give Him time. But our God is all spades. And He's your partner, and He's going to win it for you. That's the promise He makes for everybody who enters the game and plays as His partner. This is a promise only made to those who love God, who've been called according to His purpose. And I can't think of a single better reason why you should love God. You should be called. You should let His call through the gospel come to you, and you should respond to that gospel, and you should respond to that call and be one that you willingly let Him make you to the image of His Son. It's called when you say, He's Lord of my life, and I'm going to let Him call the shots, and I'm going to be more like His life. And you join with Him, you participate with Him in His death, burial, and resurrection, and the waters of baptism. You rise to walk a new life, and the rest of your life, you're trying to look more and more like the Savior who died for you. And that's when you've been called according to His purpose. And this promise is issued, and there's not a thing in your life that's outside the scope of this promise. Nothing. Can't think of a better reason. You should be a believer. So we stand and sing to encourage you.